Sebastian Gorka, Fox News national security strategist and former deputy assistant to President Trump. Doctor, you're a perfect guest for this morning. A strike like this, take us inside the mindset and decision cycle of this president as he chooses to strike Assad for the second time.
Well, first things first, Peter, the president is not a man of the mold of President Bush. He's not an interventionist. He's not a neoconservative. When I worked for him, he made it very clear to me that our forces invading other people's countries and occupying them is a fundamentally un-American concept. Nevertheless, he understands, as a compassionate man, that this kind of weapon used against unarmed women and children is evil, is reprehensible. Secondly, his advisors have made it clear to him, from Secretary Mattis to the new National Security Advisor and everybody in his A-team, that there is a precedent-setting issue here with Assad using these weapons repeatedly. A very, very clear message had to be sent, not only to Assad, but to his sponsors, including Russia and including Iran, and other countries that are countenancing the use of these weapons, such as potentially North Korea, that we will not allow anyone to use these weapons. He made it clear in his speech, we can't fix everything in the world, but this is a line that when you cross it, America has the capacity to respond, and we will. We are duty-bound morally to respond. And that's the decision process that led to last night's bombing raid.
But there's also such a delicate balance in it. And I wonder if you feel like this is the right balance that was made last night, because you don't want to go to war with Russia. And you have people asking, why don't you just take out Bashar al-Assad? If he's such an evil dictator, just get rid of the guy. You can't take off the head of Syria, or else we then own Syria, right? The United States has to take that over, as we did with Iraq, and we saw how that ended. 15 years of chaos. So is this the right balance? It seems like these airstrikes did send a message, but ultimately, where does this end?
Yeah, you're completely correct here. This isn't about us imposing, for example, as we tried to after 9/11, imposing our political way of doing business on a country in South Asia like Afghanistan or on the people of Iraq. This isn't about, the future of the political makeup of Syria. It's about making sure that everybody understands in the world that you cannot use these weapons. They are morally reprehensible, they are illegal, and we can't have them being used in a theater where there are multiple actors. This isn't just about Assad. These weapons could fall into the hands of all the different actors that are there, groups such as ISIS, such as Al-Qaeda, and then we have a much larger threat. Those weapons could be used against us on our soil. They could be used against our friends, whether it's Jordan, whether it's Israel. So there's a very concrete imperative for why we acted. What is the long-term future of Syria? That's another question that has nothing to do with yesterday's action.
And I want to bring you to that, Dr. Gorka, because here, June 2013, some near 3 years before he would become commander-in-chief, the president tweeted, "We should stay the hell out of Syria." Critics on the left and right will point to that as a real shift. What do you say?
Well, he still believes that, I can tell you. I mean, I've worked for him. I've spoken to him since I left the White House. He still believes that. He's not interested. And I guarantee you, Donald Trump is not a neoconservative, and he never will be. And he's not going to deploy 160,000 troops like we did into Iraq. He's not going to do that in Syria. So this isn't about our presence. He has no desire to do nation building. That's the farthest thing from his mind. So that sentiment remains. And I find it really disappointing that whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, I mean, I've been up on Twitter all night arguing with people who say they're conservatives. Whether you're on the left or the right, you have to understand this is a different geopolitical reality. And this isn't 2003. And this isn't Iraq. This is a very different situation, but we had to act for multiple reasons.
Dr. Gorka, today we're talking about Syria. Tomorrow we could be talking about Iran and the Iran deal that may get scrapped. The next day we could be talking about North Korea. This strike sends signals in all of those theaters. What is this White House most focused on as far as a threat to this country? Is it Assad and chemical weapons? Is it the Iranian nuclear capability? Is it North Korea? Where, when they lay their head on the pillow, are they most concerned?
On the short term, the short-term issue is North Korea. But that is progressing very, very well. Remember, in 1953, we didn't have a peace treaty at the end of the Korean War. All we had, Peter, was a ceasefire and then an armistice. So that conflict has been frozen in ice for 65 years. For the first time ever, the North Koreans are prepared to speak to an American president, and those negotiations may not lead to some kind of long-lasting resolution. But the fact that they're potentially going to happen, and the word denuclearization is being used by all parties, is massive. On top of that, the threat from the global jihadi movement remains. We've done incredible things. When our military, as a former veteran, you understand it, you've spoken to your friends, when this new commander-in-chief unleashed the military to do the job they were trained to do, unlike President Obama, guess what? They did the job. We were told ISIS was a generational threat by Obama. Well, President Trump squeezed a generation down to about 6 months because the caliphate of ISIS is gone. It isn't finished. Al-Qaeda hasn't disappeared, nor has ISIS. So we have to continue now the counter-ideological threat. But that, though, right now, North Korea is right there. Syria with chemical weapons is being dealt with, and then there are longer-term threats such as Iran. And frankly, Russia remains, it's not a strategic threat, Peter, but Russia is a destabilizing force, and they've been sent a very clear message as well.
Well, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, always good to have you. I think we have you on next hour as well, so hang tight.
Stick around.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Doctor. Well, still ahead, the U.S. military hitting specific targets in the Syria airstrikes. So what exactly was being targeted? Well, retired General Anthony Tata here to break it down for us with a map. Next.
Panders to the terrorists. So that's a pretty strong statement there from Vladimir Putin, obviously very upset about the airstrikes that happened overnight. Will they respond militarily in any way? How much will they flex those muscles? That is the big question. And then how the U.S. responds from there.
That's exactly right. Let's bring in Dr. Sebastian Gorka, Fox News national security strategist and former deputy assistant to President Trump. You just heard that statement from Vladimir Putin. He didn't condemn in the strongest possible terms the gassing of people, but instead condemns us. What do you make of that?
And says that we are only promoting the violence.
When a former KGB colonel condemns our actions, you know we took the right actions. He's a thug. That's who he is. This is the same government that yesterday, and this is not a joke, look it up on your search engines. This is the same government whose defense ministry spokesman yesterday said it was the British government that executed the chemical weapons attack in Duma last week. The Russians couldn't care less about don't make me laugh, humanitarian exigencies. This is a regime that has propped up Assad, a mass murderer. This is a regime that invaded an independent country, Ukraine, not too long ago. This is a country that supports bad guys everywhere. So if they're clamoring and making a lot of noise, you know Donald Trump took the right decision last night.
But Dr. Gorka, that statement is a perfect example of what President Trump is dealing with when it comes to Vladimir Putin and with Russia, how they continue to lie through their teeth. How does the president move forward here? How does he deal with Russia specifically, other than calling them out last night?
Everything the president is a patriot. He's the new commander-in-chief, but he's a pragmatist, and he said it. You know, the week he became president or won the election, he gave a press conference in Trump Tower where he said, "In theory, I'd like us to have better relations with Russia. Why? It's a nuclear power. It's got 11 time zones. It's on the UN National Security Council. So it makes sense to have decent relationships with Russia." But even back then, a year and a half ago, he said, if that's not possible, so be it. If they continue to do things that are against international norms, if they exploit and exacerbate unstable conditions around the world, then we can't cooperate with them. And last night we sent a very clear message, and Pete was right. When they didn't respond, when they stayed quiet, you know that they got the message that it is not business as usual, and they can no longer get away with murder like they have in the past.
So, Dr. Gorka, aside from Russia, the message also being sent to Iran and even North Korea.
Absolutely, Griff. Absolutely. Last night was about our response morally to the atrocious weapons that are chemical weapons, but also, more importantly, it's a message to anybody who supports this kind of regime and also may be thinking, like North Korea, may be thinking about their own potential use of weapons of mass destruction. So on all counts, morally, when it comes to our national security, that these weapons should not be used against our people, our citizens, and when it comes to other nations who need to be read the Riot Act, yesterday's intervention served all of those purposes at the same time.
Dr. Gorka, you hate to get political in moments like this, but of course the haters of this president immediately do so, saying he doesn't have the ability or right to strike, he doesn't have a plan. What do you say to their sudden constitutional arguments that this is not an action he could have or should have taken as commander-in-chief?
It's funny, so I didn't hear them criticizing the last president when in one weekend he bombed 7 countries. In one weekend, our forces were engaged in 7 different nations around the world. I didn't hear much protesting from the Democrats when the last president, President Obama, without due process, with a Hellfire missile, killed a U.S. citizen and his son in Yemen. Funny, if the left didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. and the president, according to Article 2, he is absolutely in his constitutional authority to use military force when there is an exigent system. This situation. This isn't a state of war. We're not invading another country. This isn't 1941. There was a threat to the international order, and we had to take action.
Well, and it's important, because you mentioned the Obama years, it's so important to look back on that time in history, because that's ultimately what led us to right here, what we are dealing with today. So let's just take a look back at some of those moments back with Obama, Rice, and John Kerry.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime. A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
We could cut the deal that got 100% of the declared chemical weapons out of Syria.
We were able to find a solution that actually removed the chemical weapons that were known from Syria in a way that the use of force would never have accomplished.
You heard it there, 100% of the chemical weapons gone.
I give your team full credit who's working in the background.
We've got some great producers on our team.
The fact that you had that ready is superb. Yeah, I mean, look, that's why we're here. We had 8 years of what? Think about it. We're the last commander-in-chief say we're going to lead from behind. Well, Pete Hegseth, how many people do you know? How many officers lead from behind? It's an oxymoron, right? You can't lead from behind. They talked about strategic patience, which means what? We're not going to do anything. We're going to let other actors act. Well, what happened? We had a Dantean inferno around the world because of that lack of American leadership. We had Russia invade Ukraine. We had the rise of ISIS. We had China building fake islands with military bases on them. We had the JCPOA Iran deal that actually strengthened and emboldened Iran, which is the key sponsor of Assad. That all changed at 12:01 on January the 20th when Donald Trump became president, and now he's fixing all the disastrous policy mistakes made by Kerry, Clinton, and Obama.
Phrase of the morning, Dantean inferno, because of a lack of American leadership. Doctor, thank you very much for your time and insights.
Thanks,
really
guys.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right.
Thank you.
More on this. We want to bring in Congressman Scott Taylor